hear birds tweeting in the background.
Yeah. We have, the older you get, the more you're aware of bird life. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
We have crows, big predator birds. We have seagulls. And today I saw 3 yellow birds.
Lots of wildlife out there.
Well, we're in the middle of the scrub overlooking the ocean, and I can see 180 degrees of ocean right now, and all this green scrub. Green and blue are our colors up here, and the weather's been divine.
Yeah. All right, we'll get going. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to PNP Live. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of Politics and Prose, along with my wife, Lisa Muscatine. And here with us this evening is the irrepressible Chris Matthews to talk about his new memoir, This Country, My Life in Politics and History. A couple of brief housekeeping notes. First, though, to post a question at any point, just click on the Q&A icon at the bottom of the screen. And in the chat column, you'll find a link for purchasing copies of This Country. It's always a pleasure to welcome Chris. He's a longtime friend of PNP's, and we've hosted events for each of his previous books. This new one is his 9th, and it's a look back at his own remarkable experiences, which have enabled him to witness or participate in many of the major political events of the past half century. Let's just say he's done pretty well for a young boy who grew up in Philadelphia in a large Irish Catholic family, joined the Peace Corps after college, then found his way to Washington. There he landed his first job as a staffer on Capitol Hill, worked later as a speechwriter for President Jimmy Carter, then as chief of staff to House Speaker Tip O'Neill. In time, he crossed into journalism, becoming a reporter and columnist for the San Francisco Examiner, and eventually, and most famously, made it big as a cable news host on a rapid-fire, no-nonsense program called Hardball. Chris's distinctive voice, passionate, informed, exuding a love for politics, has infused his previous books and does this one too. As a Washington Post reviewer noted, Chris's show on MSNBC helped define American politics for a generation, and nobody has been better over the years at identifying political currents and predicting where they were going. So it's particularly interesting and engaging now to reminisce with Chris about where he himself has been and what he's seen and done. So Chris, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Brad. You're very nice. I love Politics and Prose. I'm often over there, not just to sell books, but to buy books. That's right. Exclusively buy my books, nothing by mail. I go there to get them. I love the institution. I think it's a real community treasure. You know, I sat down to write this book about 2.5 years ago, and I wanted to write it a long time. I guess I ran out of heroes to write about. I'd written about Bobby Kennedy, Jack Kennedy, Tip and Reagan, and their, I thought, heroic, sort of interesting relationship. But I want to talk about my luck in life and my amazingly serendipities, the serendipity of my life. As Brad's right, I came from a rather normal, average family, very middle. I went to graduate school. I went to Holy Cross up in Worcester, Mass. And I was very political as a young person. I was political from the time I remember being in the movie theater with my dad, who was a Republican, and I was about 6. It was 1952. It was the beginning of the 1952 presidential election. And I saw this high-ranking, rather impressive-looking general getting onto a plane or getting off a plane, I forget, but he was right there standing by the plane. And it was Dwight Eisenhower. I asked my dad, is this guy president? He said, nobody will be. So that was sort of my first glimmer of the political life. And of course, I grew up worried about nuclear war, atomic bombs falling us from Soviet long-range airplanes. This is before there was jets, really, back in the early 50s. We would get under our desks at St. Christopher's School, and the nuns would say, you have 15 minutes until there's going to be a flash of light, and that will be the end of the world. So it was a combination of a civics lesson and public safety and religion all tied together. It was also a disciplinary measure for the nuns. It made us worry a little bit. But I grew up through all that. The Cold War, I went to the movies with a bunch of friends of mine and saw Jump into Hell, a movie about the Indochina War that the French were fighting against the Vietnamese. And that was new to me, a new front in the Cold War that our side was losing. And then, of course, I lived through Castro and his betrayal. He came in as at least the American young people like us, as a liberal democratic leader who's going to get rid of corruption and tyranny and bring about a democratic liberal government. And he did nothing of the kind. He was very quickly identifying himself as a communist and an ally of the Soviet Union, a Marxist, rather, to be very particular. And so I watched a lot of history from the outside. And then I went to the Peace Corps in Africa. And my God, talk about a life-changing experience. Anybody watching now, or who went through the Peace Corps know it changed their life. And because it's a wonderful experience. I was a trade development advisor. I was dealing with the country Swaziland in Southern Africa, right between South Africa and Mozambique. I got to meet a lot of 200 traders. I worked with the small business guys who treated me, many of them, like a son. It'd be so hot in Africa, and they would offer me a cold drink when I came by to work with them on their books or something. And they didn't even have a refrigerator, or a fridge, as they called them over there. They had nothing, but they gave me a warm Coca-Cola or a Fanta, an orange Fanta, because they wanted to be nice to me. And they were nice to all the other Peace Corps volunteers. Everybody had a great experience over there. And we did our jobs. We also had fun. I mean, I hitchhiked at one point from Swaziland, look at it on a map, all the way up to Kilimanjaro, just with my thumb, with some help occasionally from the Rhodesian Railroad and a local bus up in Tanzania. But I mainly did it with the thumb. And so I did things that normally wouldn't want your kids to do, but it was part of the adventure. I savored my memory. It's like movable feast to me. His was, Hemingway's was Paris in the 20s. Mine was Africa in the 60s. I was lucky. I came back knocking on doors on Capitol Hill. I didn't know anybody. I think I knew an elevator operator who was a patronage employee. I ended up getting a patronage employee position with the Capitol Police for several months. That was a joke. I was walking around with a .38 special loaded. They only gave us 5 bullets in those days because they didn't want us to fall. Now the bullet ignite. So I'd be walking up Pennsylvania Avenue at night, getting dinner at the Newport. What's they call it? I forget the name of that place, Newports or something like that. There's all kinds of. There was a lot of old-time restaurants up on the hill. And I'd be walking around there with a gun and a uniform on. If anything had happened, God knows what would have happened. I don't know what I would have done. So there'd been a robbery or a burglary or something going on, or an assault. People would have seen me in uniform and expect me to help them, and the bad guys would be shooting at me. So I was lucky to get through that. One of the odd things doing my jobs was to protect some papers up in the Capitol itself, and I would. My job was to protect these papers. And I found out later they were the Pentagon papers. And so I was protecting them from the public. And it turns out that our deal was don't let anybody in, but if you let somebody in, take their name down, but don't let anybody in to see them. And they'd already ran the Times, the New York Times and the Washington Post. So it wasn't like I was keeping secrets. But those kind of things happen. I was impressed at the time, by the way, that when we had a big demonstration in Capitol Hill, students, mainly anti-war students, anti-Vietnam students, and they did a lot of field arrests, which was very questionable, and they were all reversed later. But the interesting thing they did well was they had a SWAT team force in readiness they never used. They were all dressed up in riot gear, shields, helmets, the whole works, to take on if the crowd had gotten out of hand. And they kept them in reserve, I think down on the mezzanine level of the Capitol. And that's something they didn't do on January 6th this time. There was no reserve force to back up, to give backup to those poor officers that were stuck at the men and women who had to protect the Capitol building with just their regular, daily wear, just the uniforms, which didn't stop them, didn't intimidate them, and their guns, which they really couldn't use. They couldn't start firing on Americans like that. So they were basically disarmed, and they showed great heroism, but their leadership was not there. It was not a good. The fact they didn't do anything, they had no reserve force ready to protect the building itself from penetration, nothing. And we now know that they did know through intelligence, they did know through social media that these groups, these awful hard right groups, were planning the worst stuff that they eventually carried out. And yet the good guys, the ones protecting the Capitol at the leadership level, the speaker, the whole crowd of them, they didn't do a good job. They just didn't do their job of having a ready force like you have in the military. So that's what happened. I blame them for that, but I don't blame the officers, the regular people. In fact, I worked with one officer who said I would die for this building. So there was a lot of duty there, a lot of feeling of duty. in the Capitol Police Force when I was there. So a couple of months later, I was working as a legislative assistant to a senator from Utah, Frank Moss, the last liberal senator from Utah, a Democrat. I learned a lot from the inside. I remember how the Democrats would pass. They were big spenders back then. They tried to cover it up. They passed a bill called the Ironclad Ceiling on Government Spending. And then after passing that with 65 co-sponsors, Democrat and Republican, they passed 2 amendments, one excluding all entitlements, all the mandatory spending like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, debt service, that sort of thing. And then they excluded all appropriations. They provided for the ceiling, so-called, to rise every time they appropriated more than was in the budget. So it was a joke. There's another time I learned, I asked the senator, I advised him to offer an amendment to make put cost of livings and productivity increases into this, the minimum wage. Because I thought the minimum wage had been right. I checked it out. It had been brought up every once in a while by the Congress. It's sort of kept up with a combination of inflation, the GDP inflator, and the productivity rate nationally. So I said, why not codify that, make it a law? And it was defeated by the Democrats, the liberals. They didn't want to pass it. I asked one of the guys in leadership afterwards, why didn't they pass a bill that would have given people cost of living adjustments and productivity increases for their work under minimum wage? Why wouldn't they make it automatic? And it was explained to me in clear terms, because the senators want to be thanked for doing it. They want to do it themselves every couple of years and get credit for it every time from labor. They didn't want it to be automatic. Well, that was a lesson too. So Congress is very good at protecting itself from blame for big spending, and very good at getting credit where they can, even though they could make it much more automatic if they didn't go for credit themselves. So I learned a lot in the Hill, and some of it not good, some of it bad. But also, when I got to work for Tip O'Neill, I got to see one of the great leaders of our time who knew he was out of favor. He's a big liberal, a big spending liberal. He would tell you that. At the same time, he and Reagan were able to make deals when they had to. They did protect and save Social Security, that wonderful deal that Alan Greenspan had a role in. And Dole did, Bob Dole did too. They put it together in a bipartisan fashion and they made it work. They reduced the total, was the top individual tax bracket to like 28% because they got rid of a huge amount of loopholes. This was Rostenkowski doing this, the guy who had broken the law himself. And Jim Baker, they put it together with the support of Reagan and Tip. So things were good. We got to the end of the Cold War. Tip and Bob Michael went over to Moscow before Reagan ever met Gorbachev and said, we only have one president. Don't try to work with Congress. Don't try to do a workaround like some people do to get around the president. We only have one president. He wants to reduce nuclear weapons, and we believe in him. We believe that is his goal. Turned out it was his goal. We saw that in retrospect. So I learned a lot from the speaker. He was a courageous guy every day, taking on a conservative point of view, a conservative era. Even though he wasn't one of them, he was willing to fight them. And also, as I said, cut deals when he could. He's also fun. I mean, he would talk to me in the back room, stories that were wonderful. He'd talk about James Michael Curley, the character for in Last Hurrah, the crook. And I'd say, is he crooked? And Tip would say, Tip told me he was crooked by the standards of those days, which were pretty bad. And I said, was he personally corrupt? He said, personally corrupt. This is Tip's account of his mentor, James Michael Curley. He was pretty open with me, the speaker. And I can tell you now that I still like him a lot. Even everything he told me, I thought made him even better. So I did that. I went into journalism I really got my real stories. Larry Kramer of the Washington Post, formerly the Washington Post, hired me to be Washington bureau chief for the San Francisco Examiner. Now, the Examiner was the original Hearst newspaper. It was the flagship of the old empire. It was the Citizen Kane newspaper, out of the movies. It was the monarch of the dailies, it called itself. But it was a sort of a dying afternoon newspaper. Afternoon newspapers are very difficult to circulate, to distribute because of traffic and traffic mainly. You can't get the paper out to the people fast enough. You can't send it out after the closing bell. and still get it to people in time for the evening. It's just impossible physically to do it with traffic today and distances to cover. So I learned a lot from that. I covered the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was unbelievable. I was there that Wednesday when it was raining out. The doors at Potsdamer Platz had opened up just briefly on that Saturday. And I didn't wait for an assignment from my editor. I just headed over. I wasn't going to miss the best story of my life. And I remember going right down, I got a room at the hotel, the Grand Hotel, on the Unter den Linden on the communist side, on the east side. And I went over to Paritzer Platz, which is on the east side of the Brandenburg Gate. There's a bunch of people waiting there, about 50 people. And I started interviewing them. And I had this idea, what does this mean to the people that are about to get through that wall? What does it mean to them? So I kept with my limited German from my four-year Gymnasium. I had studied German. I went around and said, was ist Freiheit? What is freedom to you? And I got a lot of interesting answers. A nurse said to me, it means we'll have more nurses back on our floor because they were all fleeing to the west, getting around through Budapest to the west. And finally I get to a guy who looked like he was in Berkeley in the free speech movement back in '64. And I said, was ist Freiheit? He said, talking to you. That was a moment for me. He was talking to a Western reporter, and the woman, that same nurse, said at that point, we couldn't be talking like this 3 weeks ago. And what we were talking about was socialism, free enterprise or capitalism, and what did they want? And basically the message I got from the students when I went to the Humboldt University and covered a rally there, what they wanted was the right to decide whether they had capitalism or socialism. That's what they wanted. They wanted to be able to make the decision themselves. So I did discover that. I also discovered something else by talking to people when the wall was coming down. I began my sort of excursion to behind the Iron Curtain in April of '89. And I went over there, I started interviewing the communists who run the government. And I came up with some, I could tell they were all ready to turn. And you could tell it over there in Hungary. I mean, there's the Beach Boys were playing on the elevator, the sketch artists down on the main Utsi Vat, so the Broadway of Budapest were celebrating American movie stars. And I asked the guy about the situation. He said, is this country changing? Is this what's going on? And he said, the road to Damascus is very crowded these days, which is a great cynical comment. A lot of people are claiming that they were converting from communism. In fact, they just knew which way the wind was blowing. I went to I interviewed the head of the Communist Party in Budapest, who hit me with a line of the century. My son Michael was about 5 or 6. He was with me, and I asked him about what's going on. He said, "The socialist model isn't working." What a profound statement from a local bureaucrat. The socialist model isn't working. It was fascinating. And then I met people like factory workers and managers and school principals. And this is a lesson for us right here. These are the good communists, the ones that go to work and do their job, and they were getting screwed. They were getting paid in Eastmarks, cheap currency, which was pegged. It wasn't real. It was pegged up by the government, but it wasn't useful outside the country. You couldn't use it. They couldn't get into their own hotels. They couldn't go to the big restaurants. They couldn't go anywhere the tourists were allowed to go because their currency was a joke. They couldn't travel because only Hungary or Poland accepted their, this is Berlin, accepted their currency. I just switched from Budapest to Berlin. But it's the same thing was going on. The same thing is going on in Cuba today. The failure of communism is a failure to its own people. It's not what we think of them. It's what the people in Cuba are confronting every day. Phony currency and being treated like second-class citizens, and watching the tourists come in and being treated like they're in a regular country when they're not in a regular country. They're in a country that's totally controlled economically and personally. And so I'm not a big fan of the Castro brothers, because I think they brought over to Cuba what was never really working in Eastern Europe, because the people resented it. They resented the lack of freedom, and they resented the economic terms they had to live under, which were subservient to the Politburo types. So I got to follow that. I had the other big couple of events I got to cover as a journalist was Cape Town. When I was with Good Morning America, they sent me over to cover the first real election over there. Now, I had spent 2 years on the border of South Africa, and I'd been reading the papers, listening to SABC. I knew how bad it was. It was a country that in many ways was a first world country. It had, Christian Bernard and his heart transplants. really impressive in some ways, but racist as hell. Apartheid was everything. Grand apartheid, petty apartheid, your works. That's how they ran a country. And to go over there when it was all over, I'd gone over there with Bill Gray, the congressman from Philly, and a black African-American delegation, and had seen them confront P.W. Botha in his resort back around the Indian Ocean, the Garden Route, in this incredible palace he was at, and confronted him about what the future of his country. So when I went over there was Nelson Mandela, who refused to come out of prison after 28 years, until 20 years, because he wouldn't come out until they legalized his political party, the ANC, and legalized the Communist Party, because he wanted to have a true election. Or else he wasn't going to come out. He wasn't going to leave prison away from his wife, Winnie, away from everybody, away from everything. He was still going to stay in prison unless they legalized his parties and therefore made it a true election of the people. So I was spending that day with Archbishop Tutu. The morning was one of the most amazing mornings of my life. We get up at 6 o'clock for morning mass. Bishop Tutu, of course, is Episcopalian. He's an Anglican minister, a high churchman. That church is very high church. It's almost Roman Catholic. It's very close. We had mass in the morning at 6 o'clock. Then we zoomed over to Google Lake 2, which is one of the most dangerous places. It was a very dangerous part of South Africa. An American woman from California had been killed over there for being a so-called settler. So it was quite an experience. And I stuck very close to Archbishop Tutu that morning because I wasn't going to get hurt. And we went in and he voted for the first time when he was 62, I believe. It's the first time he yelled yippee to me when he voted. And then we spent the whole morning, he talked all morning to me, just me, about what it's like in South Africa under apartheid, and how when he'd come back from Britain where he'd been teaching, studying, he had to tell his daughter, who had grown up in England, that she couldn't use the swing because that's for the white kids. And he said how dehumanizing and humiliating that was for him. How he saw his father being called boy. This is the same thing we have in America, in the bad parts of the country, when that goes on. But to experience these things, the changes, going up in the Cold War and then seeing it end, and knowing that we're not going to have a big nuclear war between the two sides. Although I do think Putin has more of the Cold War in him than most Americans do, that's for sure. He has more of the Soviet Union and the KGB that I'd like to see in a Russian leader who wouldn't. And then to see South Africa change dramatically, and Nelson Mandela become the president. I only wish he was a younger man when he got out. He could have ruled that country for a good length of time. It needs a leader. It doesn't have one, a good one. Maybe they'll get there soon. I was in Belfast. I grew up in a family which was Protestant and Catholic. My father converted to Catholicism a year or so after he got married. I know about the differences, the fighting that goes on there over religion. My parents had a very small wedding. My mom was Roman Catholic. My father was Episcopalian with a Presbyterian mother who was a real Orange woman who was born in Northern Ireland, Antrim, County Antrim. And I came over. So that part of my life, another thing. So I guess the big theme of my life is these reversals of fortune, where things that seem to be enduring and permanent, like the Soviet Union. If anybody my age, I'm 75, remember how it felt back before 89? We were just stuck with the Soviets. They were going to be there. There's going to be this tension over the Iron Curtain. The Berlin Wall was going to be there. These were facts that were never going to change, and they did dramatically. I remember later, about 1990, interviewing a conservative editor in Bonn who said, he made a joke about it. He said, the power. Everybody says the power. It's like the power is going to always be there. Well, it isn't always there. Power dissolves at the right time. And to see South Africa, to see how bad it was in the headlines, I read in the paper about the morality laws, they called it, the way they treated blacks. I remember trying to get on a bus one time. The guy says, you can't sit in the back, you have to sit in the front, bus going through Swaziland. And never being allowed in the country. They were so afraid of the peace because they thought we were Reds. In fact, one of the commentators on SABC, the South African Broadcasting Corporation, referred to us as do-gooding intellectuals, that South African accent. But we were nothing of the kind. I may have been do-gooding. I'm not sure we were intellectuals, but we were there to do some good work. And then to see it all change, dramatically change. That's a great thing. Or something that may not mean something to everybody. To me, it meant a lot. to cover the funeral of Pope John Paul II, a man who played a big role in the end of the Soviet rule over Eastern Europe, in his country of Poland, of course. And to see the people where they paid tribute to him. And I learned something there politically too. I looked at all the people, the 3 or 4 million people that lined up. It's like they're in a trash compactor. They're waiting in line, all crunched together, no chance to go to the bathroom. I don't know how they did it for hours, just like the people in South Africa waiting forever. I really understand what standing in line means when I see these biblical lines of people. And then, of course, the poor Polish people that showed up all badly dressed and really nowhere to stay at night, I can tell. But the reason he was so popular, even as somebody from another country, a Pole as Pope, I was told was that unlike previous popes, he took the role of Bishop of Rome quite literally. And from the time he became Pope, he would spend every weekend he could visiting one of the 100 or 200 churches, parishes in Rome. And he would visit them and meet with the priests, have dinner with priests the Saturday before, then say mass the next day, and then meet with the kids. I guess the kids studying their religion in the parish rec place, whatever hall, whatever you call it, meeting them and teaching them. And that's why they took him seriously, because he really did go around and did the pastoral work of a pope, in this case as Bishop of Rome. So there's a lot of politics everywhere. I spent a lot of my life trying to analyze everything I've been through. I've been on the inside of stories, big stories that, like all these presidential elections, certainly I went to every Democratic convention starting in '64, when I was a busboy in Ocean City, New Jersey, and went to 10 miles north to Atlantic City and snuck into some things there. And I only missed the '68 one, probably the most exciting convention. I missed that one, but all the others I've been to either as a reporter or as a political person. So same with the Republican convention as a reporter. So I got to see all these people. I got to meet a lot of them. Adlai Stevenson when I was a kid. And later, people like John McCain, John Kerry, the Clintons, certainly Barack Obama, who thrilled me, obviously. I'm notorious for being thrilled by him. But that was a great moment. And we took when I had hardball, we took the kids, we took our show on the road. We went to all the college campuses and hardball college tour, we called it. And it wasn't looking around for a college for your kid to go to. It was going at the young people in college and bringing politics to them. And we got the college bands, the cheerleaders, everything to razz it up and make it exciting. And the students all loved it. They treated these guys, especially John McCain, as a rock star. And we had with some of the more colorful figures like Arnold Schwarzenegger and I guess Jesse Ventura, remember him in Minnesota? We had a couple with him. But we had very serious meetings with the others. They were less colorful than that. Anyway, I've had an amazing life. I put it all in a book. I wanted to celebrate it because it's about being on the inside. And I hope I did a good job with the book. I'm proud of the book. And Brad, I'm back to you.
All right, here I am. I think though we've lost your picture.
Oh no, let me think here.
Why don't you look and see if your video is clicked as on or if it's something.
Yeah, hold on. My wife's helping. Kathleen's helping. I'm here with that.
There you go.
Okay, thanks. I hope I have enough juice left here. I think I do.
I'll plug you in.
If you plug me in, then you have to take. Okay, thank you, Brad.
No problem. So we have a few questions to start with, and I want to encourage all the viewers to go to the Q&A column and type in your question. And I will just read through them for Chris. So John asks, you were talking, Chris, about some of your interactions with the Capitol Police when you were first on the Hill. But John wants to know, and he's a former member of the Capitol Police. He was watching the events of January 6th, and was it a truly? He says, Chris, were you watching the events of January 6th, and was it a truly visceral experience for you?
Yeah, it was good. I I felt I was being violated as a citizen. That's our cathedral of democracy. It's where everything happens. It has a history that no place in America has. It's where Lincoln gave the second inaugural address. It's where the bullet holes are still there in what we call the British stairs, where the Brits tried to get in the War of 1812 and did break in. It has so much history. It's an extraordinary place. It's where the Civil Rights Bill was passed, largely by Republican senators in '64. It's everything about our democracy. It's the coming together. It's a Congress. And I have to say that I was appalled by it. These people had idiot faces, the way they had idiot expressions on their faces. Like, I don't think they knew what they were doing, or what were they doing? Well, a president told them to do that. A president told them to do it. I guess that's like, Petain telling the French what to do in the 40s. I mean, he's the president. I mean, I like it, but he is the president, and he's telling them to do this stuff. So what can you say? I felt terrible about it. I'd been up there as a cop. I was up there, the speaker's guy. I saw how the policemen used to be so reverent, the way they protected the walls, like sanctuaries. They protect the speaker's office. They speak in hushed tones about it. It was a reverence up there that was clear. And I didn't like the fact that the first pictures we got made it look like the cops were cooperating or collaborating. I have to tell you, I was so glad to see the later pictures that came out. You could actually see them racing around trying to, that wonderful African-American fellow, that one of the officers who led them in the wrong direction so he could save Mitt Romney from the crowd. And just like Watergate, you know this, the worst thing that did happen is what didn't happen, because they weren't allowed to. Imagine if they'd gotten a hold of some of the members of the Congress. Suppose they got a hold of Mike Pence. What are they going to do with him? Tar and feather him, humiliate him, or worse? What would they have done if they got the speaker? We don't know what they're going to do, but it's horrible. They were intent on mayhem. I'm glad we have the pictures. I really do, because they cannot. And someday, I hope they do allow a systematic investigation. The Republicans, for some reason, well, they don't want the president involved. But I think there's a lot of leadership that has to answer this, what happened. There's a lot of questions affecting both parties. I'd like to know why they didn't put an adequate defense up, why they didn't have a reserve force. Tell me.
So here's another audience viewer who would like to know who your favorite interviews have been and why.
Well, usually when I catch the person off guard, when I catch them BSing, if you will, saying something they know nothing about. I had a guy on, it was a talk show host, who's kept talking about appeasement. So I don't know where this question came from, but I just said, so what's appeasement? What was it? He had no idea. It was about Czechoslovakia in 38. He had no idea it was the British and the French agreeing to give the Sudetenland to Germany. He didn't know what appeasement was. And so I like that. I guess I like Zell Miller, who wanted to have a duel with me because it was so wild. But I did, before he died, I wrote him a note and we exchanged notes. And I said that wasn't a great night for either of us. And and he was wonderful. He wrote me back with his wonderful letter. He sent me back because he was embarrassed by it. He just got upset. And I gigged him, I think. I got him a little more upset, But I didn't like it that he called so the Democrats were only going to defend the country with spitballs, and that the press owed its freedoms to the military. Okay, so we're going to have to do something here. I think we just have
Your
to.
battery just went out, so you can't have this in.
Let's take this out and put the battery in. We'll do something good without it. That's fine. Used up the electricity too.
How do you do this?
Oh, no, just no.
We still hear you, Chris.
Okay, well then let's go with this.
No.
No, we have to get the batteries running out. I'm sorry to everybody. This computer of mine.
We're fixing it. We're fixing it.
I had to. Here it is. Just put this in. This should do it. Just a second. 1 second. Yeah, if you can plug that into something, that's good work. Just read that.
You saw it going to a low battery.
Okay, here we go.
Okay, now do you see them?
I think we have the battery. You have it plugged in now. I should be all right.
So the next question from Rachel is, do you have any Joe Biden stories?
I don't want to hurt the guy. He's doing his best, and he has risen to the occasion dramatically of being president. I did hear the story that back when he was a senator, that when they had their weekly meetings, their lunches, they always made a point of letting him speak last so they could leave. Now that's cruel, but I think it's no secret that he was verbose. I say that as someone who just overran their time here, but I think everybody knew that he tended to go like Hubert Humphrey, who's another great man. Humphrey is probably a greater man than Biden, and he talked too much. Remember the joke about the oh God, this place is coming apart here. Hello, am I still on?
We can hear you.
Okay, just a minute.
You've lost your picture.
Just a minute, we'll do it. Okay. Yeah, here I'm back again. Remember that they used to talk about the German who catches one of the allies and says, "We have ways of making you stop talking." Yeah, I think that's his problem. And I think he's got it curbed. I think he's been very disciplined. I think Ron Klain deserves a lot of credit as chief of staff to keep him on mark. I think that's what James A. Baker did for Reagan. Said, okay, enough of the Reader's Digest anecdotes. Let's get back to the basics. You're here to cut taxes and increase defense spending in that case. In Biden's case, is get the economy, getting deal with COVID, helping us move it through COVID, hopefully to a satisfying conclusion to it, and also get the economy recovering from it. Those are the main issues. And that's why this fight over infrastructure is so important. And the other fight that'll come with it, which is also to help people who need help generally through the economy. So I think he's focused on what he can do and what he has to do. And I think it's like what Reagan did. And that means a good chief of staff, Ron Klain.
So this next questioner asks about your admiration of Obama, which I guess is pretty well known. This questioner says your notorious admiration. Can you talk more about that?
Well, I think it was, but he came along. Well, first of all, I mean, we all know he would be, if he were to be successful, he would be the first African-American president, which I thought was important, aside from him and all other things. I thought it was very important. I think it's very important. I remember when Jesse Jackson took the role of shadow senator for the District of Columbia. I understood, because I thought it was horrible. It was an all-white Senate. So that's a piece of this, I'll admit that. But when he gave that speech up in Boston in 2004, I was blown away. I thought that was a speech of unity. And unity really means inclusion. It's not a neutral idea. Unity means accepting minority people, people of color, as absolutely one of us. I mean, none of this minority. They are one of us. They're as American as we are, more American in terms of living here. And once you say unity, you mean inclusion. And that's what it means. Same treatment by police. I remember being in Philadelphia, in a tough neighborhood, North Philadelphia. And I'd go in there to talk about small business development, because there's a small business sort of shopping area. And it's called Prospect Plaza. And Progress Plaza. And I kept thinking, this neighborhood hasn't changed at all. This is a tough working class African-American neighborhood, North Philly. It's sort of closer to City Hall than Temple. People know where Temple is. And what the biggest applause line he got from these people on a Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, it was a big crowd, was when he talked about unity. I'm going to bring this country together. It wasn't more social benefits. It wasn't more welfare. It wasn't anything like that. It was simply bringing the country together. And I think that an African-American, and I can't speak for them, that means being treated like everybody else, being part of it. So that's why I think he also was against the Iraq War, which thrilled me, because nobody else in either party was willing to really talk against it. And none of the leaders, Hillary, Bill, John Kerry, Joe Biden, the Horks, they all, Ed Markey, all progressives too, supported that terrible war, which I thought had no basis in American history. We are not an aggressor nation, and we were an aggressor nation in that case.
Catherine asks, what women leader of today or in the past do you admire, and why?
Well, I was watching all the people who were rising up in the House, because I know the House better, and I thought Karen Bass and of course Pelosi. She's not new, but she's the best speaker. She's a better speaker in terms of discipline than Speaker O'Neill. I mean, Speaker O'Neill was never able to sort of bring the Democratic caucus together as well as she has. I mean, she rarely loses a vote. I've never seen anything like it. And I think she's the Machiavellian ideal, because, and I mean that in a good sense, that A a Machiavellian ideal is someone who's feared but not hated. People are afraid to cross her, but they don't hate her. How do you get there? Think about how hard that is. Have people fear you but not dislike you. And I think that's what she's been able to do. I mean, everybody liked Tip. I'm not sure they all feared him, but she's able to do it. She also forms amazing. She has a Catholic group. She's other groups. She got so many groups that she works. You don't even notice it. Like Jack Murtha was a huge devotee of, and he was a hawk, a real conservative from Western Pennsylvania. He loved Nancy Pelosi. I mean, she had people all across the country, mostly California, but also the East Coast. She was Baltimore. I remember when Senator Miller, State Senator Miller, the Senate leader up in Baltimore, it's actually Annapolis. We went to his funeral and she was there. This is this year. You know, she pays her dues. She shows up. So I look at Karen, I like Cherry Boustros. I think she's leaving, but I think she's great. Her district's just gotten too conservative. I think we're going to see a lot more. I think Bass might be up for something big. Those are the ones I think about.
Yeah, there are a number of questions here.
I like Madeline Dean. I think she's going somewhere. Maybe she'll go statewide. I don't know, but I think she's great.
A number of other questions here. I want to take advantage of your political expertise and ask you about the current situation. Kate or Krista asks, what are your thoughts about the current political landscape? Are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of our country?
Well, I think a lot rides on this infrastructure bill. What I mean by that is if they can hold together, if they can put 60 votes together for anything, but I think they have to play a little more hardball, the Democrats. I mean, what I did back with Speaker O'Neill, when we were fighting over infrastructure, it's a boring word. It's an abstraction. I called up the chief engineer of Peoria, who is the Republican leader of the House. That's his home base. And I got the list of all the bridges below safety code. And the speaker went on the floor of the House, down in the well, and listed them all in his face, the Republican leader's face. You against infrastructure, you're defending these dangerous bridges. The school buses are going to ride across those bridges this afternoon, and you're defending this stuff. I think you have to do that. I remember my first job on the Hill. I had a job working for the senator from Utah, and my job was to go county by county to get all the shovel-ready projects in the EDA and other agencies that are ready to go if the Democrats got an infrastructure bill through. So you can do it positively. You can use this. You can weaponize it, but you can't let it all be about spending and all this abstraction. Talking about spending trillions or whatever, almost a trillion. If that's the only issue, how much money you're spending, you're on defense. If, on the other hand, the issue is what bridges are you going to make safe, what highways are you going to fix, the local people say, that's what I want done. I want that stuff fixed. I want it safe. You got to change. And nobody's doing what I just said. Nobody is doing this. All they talk about is abstraction called infrastructure, but most people can't even figure out what it is. Some big Latinate word. And then they throw on top of that a lot of money. That's playing the Republican game. If only you talk about the cost of domestic spending, you're playing the Republican game. You've got to change it to civic needs that have to be met. Civic, like fixing the bridge. That's the difference between a first world country and a fourth world country. We fix our bridges. We paint these buildings once in a while. We fix them. It's the difference between, say, Europe and other parts of the world. You put your act together and it shows, or you don't put your act together. David Garth, remember him, the great political consultant for the Democrats. He got Lindsay elected. He got Garth. He got Ed Koch elected. Everybody elected. He got the other guy, thing about it, Huey Carey elected governor. You know what he did? He said, replace the smell of decay with the smell of construction. People like the smell of earth being moved. We just do. We want things being fixed. We want the roads fixed. We want bridges to be not scary. So the Democrats don't, I'm raising my hands there. They don't get it. I'm like Bernie Sanders. They don't get it. They keep talking about the price of it and the abstraction called infrastructure, when they should be saying bridges, tunnels, roads, and construction. There's a better word, construction. It's a rich American word that evokes cranes up, things being done, roads being paved. Yes, take it home. Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. Make it local. Take it to the district, take it to the enemy's district and say, are you defending these bridges being rickety and dangerous? I don't know. Maybe I'm teaching the old school stuff, but I know it works.
So where to go? Oh yeah, Fran wants to know if you think Trump could become president again, and if that happens, how could democracy be retained?
I don't think, but I don't know. I mean, if he can escape the law, that's the first step. If he can escape the New York Attorney General and Cy Vance in Manhattan, anything's possible. But I think he's already done his worst by declaring the election of 2020 to be corrupt, to say it was rigged. That's what they do in countries where you don't have a developed democracy. That's where it is corrupt. I mean, if somebody in Zimbabwe says the election was rigged, people would say, what else is new? Or places like that, you know, they don't have a history of democracy. They haven't forged a real constitution yet, but we have. We've had elections since 1788 or 89, and every 2 years for Congress, every 4 years for president. It always has worked and has always been accepted. And even Dick Nixon, you can hate Dick Nixon in Washington, but the fact is, when it came time to accept defeat in 1960, he's met with Jack Kennedy down in Key Biscayne. They had cokes together, the cameras were all there, and he said, Jack won. And even Ted Kennedy came out after Nixon was dead, after he died, and he said that was a great tribute to our country, that Nixon graciously acknowledged Kennedy's victory. Trump isn't good enough to do that as a person. I don't think he's good enough to do something correct like that and honor our democracy. He cares more about himself than democracy. And some of his supporters do too. They may want white rule more than democracy. I wouldn't put it past them watching them.
So here's a question from Gary about hardball. And I mean, it's no secret that given your rapid fire style and the way you would ask questions on your show, you know, some guests would have a difficult time finishing what they started out saying. So Gary wants to know if guests on hardball sometimes got angry at you for interrupting them.
Well, you know, I could say that interruption is a term of art because I already knew the answer. I could say it was bad manners. Make your pick. I wanted the show to get to the truth, and I wanted to press people. I was willing to ask the question 3 times rather than a couple times, knowing it was obnoxious, because everybody at home wants me to get answered the question they have, and it drives them crazy when a person in my position, what was my position, didn't do their job, which is to get the answer out of the person. And I like it when Sam Donaldson would do that, would drive home, or Chuck Todd does it, drive home the question you really know is out there, and these people are dodging. And if you let them off, you're letting them off for all the people who you're helping. The politician doesn't need your help. And there's another thing I discovered working in politics. If you want the best possible presentation of a politician's point of view, just listen to them. They're going to give you the best possible presentation of their point of view and what they've done and their record. It's always going to be great. It can't get any better than a politician tells you that he or she is. That's what they do. They toot their own horn. And so you have to say, well, I think there's something that you're not getting across here. Let me try to help you with that. And you got to know, like Trump, when I asked him about where he stood on abortion rights, and he said a woman needs to be punished. Maybe I didn't push that further. What did he mean? A civil penalty? Did I mean punishment of some other kind of imprisonment? What did he mean? I don't think he had any idea what he meant. He just knew that it says here the pro-life position is you're not supposed to do it, have an abortion. So he didn't know anything. He was so ill prepared. All he wanted to do was use an issue that he knew was part of the conservative coalition. But I can't apologize for that. That was my nature. I probably should. See, I'm interrupting you. See what I'm doing?
That's quite all right. This is your hour. I mean, I was just going to say, but a number of comments you haven't had time to look at from people in the chat or in the Q&A here, expressing how much they miss you. And one person asked, do you have any plans to do a podcast or any other medium?
Well, right now I'm talking about my book, and I'm going to do that for a couple more weeks, and then I'm going to stop. And but obviously I don't have any plans, and I'm being cute about this. I have no plans. I have no intentions to do any more. But I'm not going to stop writing. I'm ready for the Washington Monthly. It's a great organization. Charlie Peters started that, and it's still a great organization with Paul Glastris, and Matt Cooper. I love the fact they run my stuff, and I think that's enough for me. I'm teaching. I love this title, Distinguished Professor of American Politics and Media at Fulbright University, Vietnam. I'm going to keep teaching over in Ho Chi Minh City because they're our ally now. It's so ironic. We're in this together against the Chinese, and the kids are great. So they're so smart, so earnest, and they love learning more about America. So I've got a lot on my plate, but I'm sure I'll knock out more books if I can.
How would you rate or grade your profession? I guess your profession being journalism.
Well, if I were God, which I'm not, but I'll say it. I think we should have more people trying to tell, like we do in courtroom dramas, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but. I think there's a lot of honesty in the journalism today, but it's all on the side of an argument. So you array your troops, you get the facts, and you make your case. But maybe it's better to start with the facts and not start with the argument. Maybe people ought to be a little more open to the other side. I mean, the big spending of this administration, I think Larry Summers has to be listened to. This could be explosive. This could lead to galloping inflation. And that would be a big downside we better talk about before we cause it. I think that if we intimidate good police officers, and I'm very careful here, intimidate good police officers from doing their jobs, we're going to have problems. Because when we dial 911, we want a good, tough, courageous cop to show up. A courageous, good cop. We don't want somebody showing up who doesn't want to do anything, who's going to be hiding from the dangers. Because police, whether we like it or not, have to deal with dangerous situations. And the only people, to me, they're going to be there with a gun and authority, and they can protect us. And so we don't want to discourage them from doing their jobs. We want to encourage them to do their jobs properly with respect for all people. But that's not the same as defunding. Defunding sends a message of contempt for the entire police force. And I think that's wrong.
We're back to a couple of questions about sort of what's going to happen with politics in this country. Let me try to combine two of these. One says, what do you think will happen in the midterm elections? And the other asks, how concerned are you about the future of elections given Republican efforts to make it difficult to vote and to allow state legislatures to override electors?
Scary. That last one's really scary. Imagine a state like Arizona, for example, where the people may be pro-blue and the government is, the legislature is red. And they actually said, nice try. You lose, say, a Republican loses that presidential race by 10, 20,000 votes. It's close enough for them to steal it. You know what I mean? They can say, well, that's too close. I worry about that, of course. I think I think the country will rebel against it. I don't think the courts are going to put up with it, but if it's in legislative language and it's codified, I mean, God knows. In terms of 20, I have got very few fervent political beliefs. One is I don't like wars that are stupid, where we killed 200,000 people in the Iraqi war and 4,000 or 5,000 Americans dead because of it. Two, I don't like any talk of voter suppression. I think we should have as true a democracy as we can have. I think most of this Republican stuff is aimed at reducing the Democratic vote, which in most cases minority votes. And they want to reduce it. I don't think they're against Black people per se in this case, but they don't want them having a vote. They want to make sure these votes, they don't like souls to the polls, and anything they see seems to be a pattern of Black voting they want to stomp out. It's pretty clear that leaders of the Republican legislative leader in Pennsylvania made that clear a couple of years ago. We're here to make it difficult for Democrats to win elections through our laws. As for 2022, I think Democrats better be ready for a real challenge, because the electoral map every 10 years seems to move further south. Pennsylvania apparently loses a congressional seat every 10 years since 1910 or something. The people who are building up their votes are Florida because of air conditioning, Texas because of air conditioning. They're quite habitable states because of air conditioning. And so people are moving south, retirees are moving south. People do it to avoid taxes, especially in Florida. The map is moving conservative, and they're picking up congressional seats. The other thing is the reapportionment. As I said, the state legislatures are Republican. The Democrats didn't do the job of winning those local seats. The country's fairly conservative in many parts of the world. I understand that in parts of the country. And so they're getting they've got the kind of congressional apportionment, the kind of gerrymandering they want. Those weird shaped districts are still being created. So you have those two forces, the electoral map moving south to the Sun Belt, and then you have state legislators playing around with the votes to make sure that the Republicans get the most seats they can. And then you have the midterm pattern of history, which is party in power, party kind of controlling the White House tends to lose seats. Churchill once said this, my hero Churchill said that never run representing the government in a by-election, because anybody's mad about anything votes against you. And the other thing is what they're up to. It's clear that Mitch McConnell and Kevin McCarthy have decided they want nothing to be passed by Congress from now to next November, November 22. They want to run a completely negative campaign. And they've had a pattern over the years of how they do it. Murray Chotiner, who was Nixon's campaign manager back in 46 when he first got elected, had a rule that they still honor, the Republican Party. The premise is, the postulate is, the average voter can only think of 3 issues when they're going into the voting booth. They don't have a wide array of votes, of issues, but they have 3. They max out at 3. Therefore, the campaign strategy should be to make sure to make all 3 issues of the campaign about the opponent and all 3 negative. So back in 1952, when I first took an interest in politics, it was communism, corruption, and Korea. Then in the 70s, Brad, you remember this, it was amnesty, abortion, and acid. It was drugs, abortion, amnesty for the Vietnam War. Now it's clearly going to be violent crime, inflation, we're still blame on the Democrats spending, and third, the border, the open border. They have got it all figured out. And then they'll do other kinds of things they'll do about cultural change. But these 3 are going to be the big pillars of their election campaign. And I think they got a shot at knocking off with this very narrow, very fragile Democratic control right now. They got a hell of an army coming at the Democrats. And I hope that Joe Biden gets this bill passed on infrastructure, because he needs it to get the next bill passed and any hope of getting a pattern set here, bipartisan behavior, or he's going to have to get rid, which I think he's going to have to, get rid of the filibuster. And I'm a real institutionalist. I don't like saying it, but we cannot have a government held captive to a 60 vote requirement in everything. That's too much of a majority in a country that is inevitably 50-50. And by the way, there are 21 states right now, you can look it up, who are ruby red, which means you can never get 60 votes for a Democratic position. It's very hard, because you got people like, Joe Manchin represents a ruby red state. That would be 22 states. But there's just not going to be 60 votes against that. There's just not enough votes. And I think it's a challenge. So I'm for getting rid of the filibuster.
Let's end with a question from Kelly, who asks, what do you love about this country the most and are the most proud of? And let me tack on a question about the title of your book, which is, This Country. So why'd you name your memoir this
Well,
country?
I got the idea,
you love
Brad,
most
because I remember the certitude with which Harry Truman would refer to this country as this country. He talked like he knew it, like he spoke for it, like they were going to vote for him in 48. He knew. They had been together during the Second World War. We were a united country coming out of the Great Depression. We're a united country in World War II. We're a united country, and we were a country. This country, you could actually say it. That's being challenged today by a minority view. I think it's still a minority of people who are willing to deconstruct everything we believe in, democracy, everything. And I worry about it. But the book is meant to be a tribute to what we've had. And I love this country because it's a free country and everybody in the world wants to come here. As Jack Kennedy said in Berlin, we have problems, but we don't have walls to keep people in. We didn't have to wall people in. Everybody wants to come here. And it's a system of mixed capitalism, part government, part private sector. It's a good mixture. It has to change once in a while, the formula, but it's basically a combination of those two forces. It's no surprise that our country basically came up with the vaccination before anybody else. There's no surprise. Why? Who else? But the Russians are useless at this. That's a gas station with an army. They have nothing creative going on over there. There are other countries that are highly successful, like Germany, but I think everybody knew this was the country of ideas and innovation. It's the country of Thomas Edison and everybody. It's who we are. We're innovative. We're optimistic, I think, still. And Adlai Stevenson, I quote him in my book, he talked about to be an American has this sense of inner freedom, a sense of feeling free. You don't have, as Obama says, you don't have somebody knocking on your door at night for the government. You don't have to hire somebody's kid or brother to open a business here. With all the complaints, it's a free country compared to anywhere else. And I think people want to come here. For all kinds of reasons. I remember Anthony Hopkins, one of the great actors, he just won the Academy Award this year, said he came to America when he went to the Bel Air Hotel. He said, I'm staying here. This country's too great. It's sunny, it's positive. You can remake your identity. You can come here as a Brit, become an American. You come here as a Frenchman or an African, and you can be, I mean, a modern day African, not a slave, but as a modern African, and you can become an American. And that's not true of other countries. You can actually, I said that in my book, that's my idea of American exceptionalism. You can become an American because it's about ideas and commitments to values. It's not about tribe or ethnicity. It's, if you really believe it, I think we should welcome anybody who wants to be an American, who really wants to be an American, and live by what we live in, by what we live by.
And as you've shown in your book, you certainly made the most out of the opportunities that came your way. It's really been great hearing you talk about the wide range of your experiences, and it's always great hearing you talk, Chris, about political events. So congratulations on the book, and thanks for spending.
I love Politics and Prose, Brad. I love your bookstore. It's just a joy to go in there and check out what's selling. I always ask, what's the best fiction when I'm buying gifts for the Queen? You know that. I always go and say, what's the best fiction? What are people talking about in here? And I go to the nonfiction where all my competitors are, see how they're doing.
Well, when you're next in town, come by and say hi again. To everyone watching, thanks for tuning in. A reminder that in the chat column, you can find a link for purchasing copies of This Country. From all of us here at Politics and Prose, stay well.